Hello. This is the first in our key talking points for Homer and the Odyssey. I'm going to begin with part 1, which will include items such as Homer, our author, in medias res, and the Homeric question. Okay, so we're going to begin with looking at the author of our wonderful epic poem, the Odyssey. This is Homer. See this guy here? And the nice bust. We'll talk about him in detail. Not Homer Simpson, who you all may know from our lovable TV show. Not him. Okay? This Homer, not little Homer. Okay. All right, a few things about our poet Homer. Number one, most important thing is Homer is a mysterious poet of epic proportions. Now, we're going to talk a lot about what epic means, but for now, just know that epic is big. Okay, you use epic in today's society, meaning something cool or large or something you can't put your hands around. That was epic. But we are going to use that word multiple times when we're reading the Odyssey and talking about our poet Homer. Now, there are many discrepancies surrounding our poet. He is a blind poet, which brings up some questions, and then we're also going to talk a little bit about his birth and historical items about him in just a second. His major claim to fame, he is the man responsible for the first written literature, meaning that he wrote it down. Okay? The Odyssey and the Iliad are both his famous pieces. All right, so let's look at these for just a quick second. Originally, these stories were told by oral tradition. They were handed down and read in towns by bards, B-A-R-D. Bards are like singers, like folk singers. They told these epic stories from town to town and passed them down. People picked them up, told them to their families, and they began to spread in that such a way. But Homer decided that they should be written down so that people could hear not necessarily what the true story was, but a continuous story that is the same. Everybody could share in the experience of having the same story instead of listening to maybe variations along the way. So his most famous writings are the Iliad, which came first, which was about mostly the Trojan War, which we're not going to address too much, but we will talk about the Iliad a little bit as we get into the second, which maybe we'll call the sequel, Homer's The Odyssey. That is the focus of what we're going to do freshman year. The Odyssey is the journey home from the Trojan War. Now, these two books are thought by some to have been the backbone of an ancient Greek youth's education. Okay, so previously people were listening to different stories. Okay, now we have two books that have been written down, epic poems, and now you can bring them into the classroom. Right, everybody can look at them, and you can read them and experience them. So they were brought into the Greek education. Okay, so let's put these aside also for a second and look at this term here, in medias res. All right, notice the arrow, middle, beginning, and end. Seems a little bit out of order, doesn't it? But this is how Homer began both of his grand epic poems. He started in the middle of things, which is the translation of the Latin phrase in medias res, in the middle of things. So you start with the middle, which means you start with the interesting point. You grab somebody's attention. You tell them something juicy. You get their attention. And then you say, okay, now let's go back to the beginning. Let me fill you in a little bit to get up to that juicy point. And once you get to filling them in, then you can end your story. So you begin in the middle. You fill in the blanks from the beginning, maybe flashbacks and such, and then you continue to the end of your story. It's a very good concept because it pulls in the reader. All right, so then 2 items you want to take away from in medias res is 1, this term defines the manner in which Homer begins his 2 epic poems. Both the Iliad and the Odyssey start in the middle of things. Second item is starting in the middle of a story, grabs the reader, and then allows the reader to fill in the details. Okay, so moving along, what we want to talk just a little bit about next is this whole questionable situation surrounding Homer. Okay? Homer's history. All right? Let's look at his birth certificate for a second. Look at this. We know that his name is Homer, but we don't know his height, his place of birth, his weight, his mother's name, his father's name. Clearly, this is just a silly little example, but what they call the Homeric question is a true point that scholars like to debate a little bit. Nobody knows necessarily his place of birth. Generally, we know what time period he lived in, but do we know all the details? Back then, people didn't keep very good written records. There was no courthouse where you went to file your birth certificates or your residency. So this Homeric question deals with lots of speculation around Homer. Was it he who actually wrote down the first literature? Was he actually one person? Is he a group of people? All right, there are no solid theories to prove that it could be others, but for our general purposes, we are going to believe that on any test or any situation that comes up for us, that our Homer did write, indeed, the Iliad and the Odyssey. Okay? So lastly, just to recap a little bit of our key items, this is our Homer, not Homer Simpson. Okay, although there is a really good clip of the Odyssey in one of the Simpsons episodes that maybe we'll get to look at. It's pretty funny. Our Homer wrote us the Iliad and the Odyssey. Of course, the Odyssey is the one we're going to be touching on in this class. In medias res is an item that you're going to learn about. And then the question of Homer and his origins. Okay, him being the blind poet who wrote down these fabulous stories for us to read centuries later. So use this little explain everything as a refresher, as a review for yourself, and then we will get into, and I will post key talking points too.